Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling a really hot topic, actually,
Yeah.
that's been making headlines and sparking debates globally.
Yeah.
And it all revolves around this idea of banning foreign software.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, we're going to be focusing on TikTok,
Oh, yeah.
which has been right in the spotlight of
Yeah.
this whole issue.
Oh, for sure. Front and center.
So
Yeah.
to guide us through this complex and really fascinating topic, we're going to be diving deep into an article
Okay.
from the Washington University Global Studies Law Review
Okay.
called The Banning of TikTok and the Ban of Foreign Software for National Security Purposes, written by Madison Claudius back in 2022.
Okay.
So we're going to be unpacking the legal maze, looking at what other countries have done
Mm.
and exploring what this all means for the future of our digital lives.
A lot to cover.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting topic, though.
Let's rewind back to August 6, 2020.
Okay.
When President Trump issued an executive order essentially trying to ban TikTok in the U.S.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Really shook things up.
For sure. And he invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA for short. But typically, it's used to put pressure on foreign governments, not tech companies.
So using it on a social media app like this was totally unprecedented, right?
Right.
What was the core argument behind such a drastic move?
Well, the Trump administration and supporters of the ban were deeply concerned about the Chinese government potentially getting its hands on American user data through TikTok.
Okay, so data security is the big worry here.
Yeah.
But then wouldn't that make almost every app a potential threat? I mean, we all remember the Equifax data breach,
Oh, yeah.
and that wasn't a foreign company.
Right.
So what makes TikTok's data particularly risky in this context?
Yeah. That's a great question, and one that cybersecurity experts have debated extensively. The type of data that TikTok collects, things like browsing history, location context, that could be valuable for profiling individuals and even predicting behavior. The concern is that this information, in the wrong hands, could be used for purposes beyond just targeted advertising.
So the risk is less about the data itself and more about who might exploit it.
Exactly. The potential for a foreign government to leverage that data for intelligence gathering or even influence operations is a significant concern for national security agencies.
And TikTok didn't just sit back and accept this.
Oh, absolutely not. They hit back with a lawsuit claiming the ban was a violation of their right to due process and arguing that the president was overstepping his authority under IEPA.
This legal battle raises another crucial point: freedom of expression.
Right.
Banning an entire platform,
Yeah.
especially one as popular as TikTok, has to raise some First Amendment red flags, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. There's a strong argument that such a ban would infringe on the freedom of expression for both the creators and the millions of users who rely on TikTok for communication and sharing their views.
And it gets even more interesting when you consider that TikTok was sometimes used to criticize governments, even the Trump administration itself.
Right, that really highlights how these platforms have become important spaces for political discourse and even dissent. And banning them outright could be seen as an attempt to stifle those voices.
And this is where the software as speech argument comes into play.
Precisely. This is a complex legal concept, but in essence, some experts argue that software, like the code that makes up TikTok, can be considered a form of protected speech. So banning TikTok simply because it was developed by a Chinese company, ByteDance.
Could be interpreted as discriminatory.
So it's not just about data, but about potentially restricting a form of expression based on its origin. But then the Biden administration comes in and reverses the Trump-era ban, opting for a broader review of foreign-controlled apps instead.
What was the reasoning behind that shift?
Well, the Biden administration wanted to develop a more comprehensive and transparent process for assessing national security risks posed by these apps. They aimed to establish clear criteria that would be consistently applied, rather than relying on executive orders that could be seen as arbitrary or politically motivated.
So it's less about targeting specific apps and more about creating a framework for evaluating potential risks across the board.
Exactly. It's a recognition that this issue is far more complex than simply banning one app or another. It requires a nuanced approach that considers the broader implications for cybersecurity, freedom of expression, and international relations.
And the U.S. isn't the only country wrestling with this, right?
Right.
What about other countries? How have they approached the challenge of foreign technology and perceived security threats?
Yeah, let's take a look at some international precedents. Each country offers a unique perspective on this complex issue with different approaches and outcomes. Shall we kick off our world tour in a country? known for its strict approach to foreign software. China.
Lead the way.
So China's approach to cybersecurity is deeply intertwined with their concept of cyberspace sovereignty.
Okay.
They've implemented strict regulations, particularly through their 2016 cybersecurity law.
So it's all about controlling the flow of information
Yeah.
within their digital borders, right?
Yes, exactly.
What are some of the key aspects of this law?
Well, one of the most significant is the emphasis on data localization.
Okay.
So companies operating in China are often required to store data on servers physically located within the country.
That makes accessing that data from outside China much more difficult, I imagine.
Precisely. And that has a significant impact on foreign companies trying to do business in China. The law also places stringent requirements on network operators and internet service providers, including social media platforms.
And how does this impact users in China?
So the government has broad authority to monitor online activity and can demand the removal of content deemed inappropriate or a threat to national security.
So no surprise then that big names like Facebook, Google, Snapchat, and Twitter are all blocked in China.
Exactly. And this approach has fostered the growth of a vibrant domestic tech industry, with homegrown alternatives to these platforms flourishing. But there's a debate about whether this comes at the cost of limiting access to global innovation and limiting the free flow of information.
It's a trade-off, isn't it? Building up your own tech ecosystem, but potentially isolating it from outside influences.
Right.
What about the human rights implications of such a controlled internet?
That's a crucial point. These restrictions raise serious concerns about freedom of expression and the potential for censorship. There have been cases of apps being taken down and even individuals being arrested for posting content deemed critical of the government.
Wow, so this control extends even to companies like Apple, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of concessions do they have to make to operate in such a tightly regulated environment?
To comply with Chinese law, Apple has had to remove thousands of apps from its app store in China that are readily available in other countries. Okay.
And this includes apps related to VPNs, which allow users to bypass internet restrictions, as well as apps that offer content deemed politically sensitive.
I remember reading about how Apple stores Chinese customer data on servers owned by a state-owned company.
Yes.
Does that raise any red flags for you?
It certainly raises concerns about data security and privacy. This arrangement means that Chinese authorities potentially have direct access to that data, which includes personal information about millions of Chinese citizens.
So it's not just about banning apps, it's about the underlying infrastructure and the control that the government exerts over data.
It's about shaping the entire digital landscape. All right, let's shift gears geographically and head over to India.
Okay.
They've also been making headlines with their stance on foreign tech, haven't they?
Yes. India has also taken a strong stance, particularly against Chinese apps.
They made a big move by banning over 60 Chinese apps, including TikTok.
Right.
What was their rationale behind that?
The Indian government cited national security concerns, much like the U.S. They were worried about the potential for data leaks and the possibility of the Chinese government accessing sensitive information about Indian citizens.
But isn't there more to the story? Didn't this ban coincide with some heightened tensions between India and China?
You're right. This ban followed a border dispute between the two countries, escalating geopolitical tensions.
So national security concerns might be intertwined with political and economic motivations.
It's hard to disentangle those factors. The ban certainly had economic repercussions. TikTok, which had a massive user base in India, suffered significant losses.
It also sent a strong message to other countries, signaling that India was willing to take decisive action against foreign tech perceived as a threat.
And they're not stopping there, are they? Didn't I hear something about India working on a new cybersecurity law?
That's correct. India is in the process of developing a new law aimed at bolstering its cybersecurity framework.
It's still in draft form, but it has some similarities to China's approach, particularly when it comes to data localization.
So more emphasis on keeping data within India's borders.
Exactly. The proposed law would mandate that certain types of data be stored locally and would provide law enforcement agencies with broader access to data for security of the state.
Sounds like a move towards greater control over data.
That's a fair assessment. And as with any law that expands government powers, it's important to consider the potential impact on human rights, particularly freedom of expression and privacy.
So the debate continues. How to strike that balance between security and liberty in the digital age.
Right.
Now for our next stop, let's journey to Europe. specifically Germany.
Okay.
They're operating under a different set of rules than China and India, aren't they?
Yes, Germany is part of the European Union and adheres to the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR.
GDPR. It's one of the most comprehensive and stringent data protection laws globally.
For sure.
GDPR has been a game changer, forcing companies worldwide to rethink how they handle personal data. Could you give us a quick rundown of what makes GDPR so significant?
GDPR places a strong emphasis on individual rights and control over personal data. It requires companies to be transparent about how they collect and use data, and gives individuals the right to access, correct, and even delete their data.
And if companies don't comply, they face hefty fines, right?
That's right. The potential for substantial financial penalties has incentivized companies to take GDPR compliance very seriously.
Given this strong focus on data protection, has the EU taken any action against TikTok?
Interestingly, despite launching several investigations into TikTok's data practices, the EU hasn't implemented any outright bans. However, they've issued warnings and are closely scrutinizing the company's compliance with GDPR.
So it's more of a cautious approach,
Yeah,
gathering evidence and assessing the risks before taking any drastic action.
that seems to be the strategy.
Germany, in particular, has its own Federal Data Protection Act,
Mhm.
which is even stricter than GDPR. In some aspects, wow, stricter than GDPR. That's saying something.
It places a strong emphasis on data minimization and purpose limitation. So companies can only collect and process data for specific legitimate purposes and must minimize the amount of data they collect.
So they're taking data protection very seriously. But here's a surprising twist. Didn't Germany ban a children's toy?
Right.
My friend Kayla, over espionage concerns.
Yes, that's right. The toy, which was equipped with microphones and cameras, was deemed a threat to children's privacy due to concerns that it could be used for surveillance.
So it's not just about apps and software. It's about any device or technology that can collect and transmit personal data.
Cybersecurity concerns are expanding to encompass the entire Internet of Things.
So to sum up, our European leg of the journey, Germany and the EU are taking a more measured approach, focusing on data protection and privacy regulations, rather than outright bans.
They're trying to find that sweet spot between security and freedom, which is no easy feat.
And now, after this whirlwind global tour, let's bring the conversation back home.
Yeah.
To the United States. We've seen how other countries are grappling with this complex issue. But what does it all mean for us? What are the potential implications of a TikTok ban or similar measures in the U.S.?
That's a question with no easy answers. We need to consider the potential ramifications across multiple dimensions: economic, social, and political.
Let's start with the economic side of things. A TikTok ban in the U.S. could lead to other countries retaliating by banning American apps.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
So we could end up in a digital trade war.
It's a real possibility.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where Facebook, Instagram, or even Google services are blocked in major markets around the world.
That would have huge implications for American tech companies.
Oh, it would be massive. These companies rely on global reach for their revenue and influence.
And wouldn't that hurt American innovation overall? If our companies are kind of cut off from these global markets, wouldn't that stifle growth and creativity?
That's a valid concern. A fragmented internet with each country operating in its own walled garden could hinder the flow of ideas and collaboration that drives technological advancement.
So it's not just about one app, it's about the bigger picture.
Right. It's about the future of the internet as we know it.
Exactly. And beyond the economic consequences, there are the social and political implications to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
Banning foreign software, even in the name of national security, raises concerns about censorship and freedom of expression here in the U.S.
Absolutely.
The First Amendment protects our right to free speech, and that includes the digital world.
It does.
Well, there are legitimate concerns about foreign governments using platforms for things like propaganda or disinformation. We have to be careful not to overreach in our response.
Yeah, finding that balance is crucial.
So how do we strike that balance? How do we address the national security concerns without creating a climate of fear and censorship?
It's a tough question, but I think transparency is key. The government needs to be clear about the specific threats they're addressing and the criteria they're using to assess risk. There also needs to be a clear legal framework that ensures due process and protects against arbitrary bans.
And shouldn't we also be focusing on strengthening our own cybersecurity defenses instead of simply blocking access to foreign apps?
Absolutely. Investing in robust cybersecurity infrastructure is crucial.
Okay.
We need to be able to detect and defend against threats, regardless of their origin.
It's like building a stronger immune system, rather than just avoiding contact with anything that might make us sick.
Exactly, a good analogy.
And we can't forget about individual responsibility. Users need to be aware of the data they're sharing and the potential risks involved.
Right, being informed and making conscious choices
Yeah.
about your online activity is essential.
So much of this debate hinges on this idea
Yeah.
that foreign governments could access user data through these apps. But honestly, our data isn't exactly safe even within the US, is it?
That's a really important point. We've seen numerous examples of data breaches and privacy violations involving American companies.
Yeah, and even the US government itself has access to a lot of data through surveillance programs and data requests from tech companies.
That's right.
So it's a reminder that data security is complex and goes beyond just focusing on these foreign threats.
For sure.
We need a holistic approach that addresses the vulnerabilities across the entire digital ecosystem.
I completely agree.
This all brings us back to the core question. How do we balance national security with individual liberties in this increasingly interconnected world?
It's the million-dollar question,
It really is.
and one that's only going to become more pressing as technology continues to evolve.
This deep dive into TikTok bans and the global cybersecurity landscape has really highlighted how complex this issue is.
It has. There are no easy answers.
It's about navigating a constantly shifting landscape, weighing the risks and benefits, and making informed choices that reflect our values. What's clear is that this conversation needs to continue. We need to engage with these issues, stay informed, and advocate for policies that protect both our security and our freedoms.
I think that's a great takeaway. The choices we make today will shape the digital world of tomorrow. It's up to all of us to ensure that it's a world that is both secure and free.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep the conversation going.